As I said earlier, we're starting a new series today called Share Your Story. And each one of us has our own completely unique, customized story. It's everything that has ever happened to you, and it actually makes you, you. It's the plot of your own movie. It influences everything that you do. And every relationship, every opportunity is influenced by your story. And then when we interact together, your story joins with our story. And our story joins with yours as we enter into each other's stories. We affect each other's lives. And this month we're going to hear from several people who are going to be sharing their stories. And there are times that you're going to be able to identify with what you hear, and it's going to be moving to you as you are able to see yourself in somebody else's story and know that you share this in common, that you're not alone in this. You'll also hear some things that are challenging to you because we're going to be invited to see life through each other's eyes, to see somebody else's story that might be different from our story. Do you know what I'm talking about? So we're excited about this the Story series, and I want to make just a few comments before we invite our special guest John up today. I've shared many times here, if you've been around One Church, that I grew up in rural Ohio, surrounded by farms. It was not the most diverse place in the world. If you consider different kinds of cattle diversity, then yes, it was. Or like corn, soybeans, wheat, if that's diversity, then yes. But in other ways, it wasn't. I've shared before, and I shared with John this week, actually, the first time I had a conversation with an African-American person, I was in my early 20s. That's embarrassing. And it's just the truth of my background. That's where I came from. And you could imagine everything that goes along with that. And so probably more than many of you, I've seen what it looks like to choose to not understand, to choose to not view life through other people's eyes. I've seen that and where that leads and the kind of society that creates. I've seen it up close and personal. And I personally, I'm just telling my story, I want to move past that. I want something different from my life and my children, my son and the one on the way right now. I want something different for them. So a pastor named Rob Bell is quoted as saying, "But it's a dangerous thing when we start to think that our world is the world." When I start to think that however I grew up is the way that it is all over the world, and we're not willing to enter into somebody else's experience. And so I'd like to just read a couple of scriptures before we invite up John about understanding, about wisdom, about being open and looking at life through other people's eyes. The first is from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. It says, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. For she," and wisdom is personified as a woman, by the way, ladies. Not bad, eh? Right? "For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She, wisdom, is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and those who hold her fast will be blessed." And then the writer of Proverbs goes on to define wisdom in several ways. One of them is in Proverbs 29, verse 7. "The righteous," people who want to follow God, "the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern." And I'm skipping ahead, sorry about that. So when I read that the righteous care about justice for the poor, it causes me to ask, do I care about justice for the poor? Or do I have no such concern? Because according to Proverbs, I'm defined by that, whether I'm righteous or not. Then Isaiah chapter 1, they go to the Old Testament prophets. Isaiah chapter 1, he preaches to the people, "Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong." And you're thinking, well, what are they doing? And he says, "Learn to do right. Seek justice." Here's what it means to do right. If you want to be a follower of God in this world, here's what it means to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. So God, what does it mean to do right? Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. Your rulers are rebels, partners with thieves. They all love bribes and chase after gifts. Boy, it's good that doesn't apply to political rulers today, right? Goodness. They do not defend the cause of the fatherless. The widow's case does not come before them. We need good leaders in our society, and we want to create that kind of a society ourselves. So, do I defend the cause of the fatherless, the widow? In other words, those who are vulnerable in our society. What does God say makes a good and righteous person? Seeking justice, defending the oppressed, being an advocate for the fatherless, the widow, and the most vulnerable in our society. And that wasn't in a lot of the Christian preaching I heard growing up. That's what the Bible says, though, about what righteousness means. And then there's some people who might say, well, that's the Old Testament. We're Christians. We live in the New Covenant now. Well, let's go to Luke chapter 4. And this is how Jesus introduces his ministry. He goes to a synagogue and he reads out of the prophet Isaiah chapter 61, and then watch what he says after it. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." In other words, Jesus is saying, this is what I'm all about. This is what I came to do. These things. And so for a person who wants to follow Jesus, am I proclaiming good news to the poor? Am I proclaiming, I'm asking myself, freedom for the prisoners? Recovery of sight to the blind. Does this describe my life? Setting the oppressed free, proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. Do other people look at my life and they say, oh, that guy, he cares about sight for the blind and freedom from the prisoners and setting the oppressed free? That's what he cares about. Do people look at my life and see that? And how about you? It's hard work to love justice and to be a righteous person the way that Scripture commands, because it requires us to see life through the eyes of other people. Are you with me so far? I know this is like hard preaching here, isn't it, brothers and sisters? Well, this is what we're challenged by in our faith, to live this kind of a life. Now, some people one more comment, some people come to church, they've had a hard week, stress-filled week, anxiety, and they come looking for some kind of feeling of relief, a touch from God that'll help them to make it through the next week. I know you all know what I'm talking about. We all feel that way. And there are some people who might say, well, you talk about justice and righteousness and defending the oppressed and being an advocate and seeing life through other people's eyes, and that just doesn't quite do it for me. That doesn't give me the uplifting experience that I feel like I need. Last week I shared about my friend who's been clean and sober for 10 years through AA. And one of the things he taught me is, later on in the process of AA, what they tell folks is, in order to stay sober, you've got to get outside of yourself. And you serve other people, and you take this freedom that you found to other people. And the taking of that to other people is actually what keeps you free. It's actually what keeps you sober when you get outside of yourself and aren't focused on your anxiety and your stress and all these things that have been beating you down all week. But you get outside of yourself and you become an advocate for the oppressed, and you seek justice for people who are being treated unjustly. And you set prisoners free. That's actually how you get relief. And you keep relief from that anxiety. You know what I'm talking about? You keep relief from that anxiety and that stress. And that's a lot of times that's what we're missing in our lives. Are you really stressed out? Are you beaten down really low? My friend would say, get out and serve. Live this kind of a life, because that's what's gonna empower you and reduce your anxiety and help you see life in perspective and give you that uplifting experience, that cathartic experience that you need. And so it's in that spirit that we enter this Share Your Story series. And I want to read John's bio, give him a proper introduction. We're welcoming John and Lamar back. This is their second time at One Church. And John is an accomplished man, and I want to give him a proper introduction. John Akram grew up in a family of steelworkers in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. During high school, he participated in drama, football, and track. In 1964, an athletic scholarship led him to Edward Waters College in Jacksonville, Florida, where he set records in pole vault and was considered a 1968 Olympics hopeful. After 2 years of college, John was drafted into the Air Force to serve in Vietnam as an aircraft maintenance technician. During his tours of duty, He completed associate's degrees in both social services and aircraft maintenance technology. After 8 years of service, John joined the Arizona National Guard and pursued a career in airline administration and operations. Returning to active duty in the Air Force, he completed a bachelor's degree in professional aeronautics and a master's in organizational management. John's tours of duty took him to Europe and the Middle East, seeing combat yet again in Operation Desert Storm. He was commended for his work as an aircraft maintenance supervisor at Da Haran Air Force Base in Saudi Arabia. During his tour of duty in Saudi Arabia, John made pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca to perform the Umrah, the Lesser Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Upon returning to the States, he joined the Muslim American Military Association, authorized by the Chief of Staff Chaplain in Washington, D.C., and a year later, this organization took 100 military personnel to the Hajj in Mecca. John catalyzed mosques at every Air Force installation to which he was assigned, each authorized by the installation chaplain and his base commanders. On each base, John conducted Islamic services to enhance spiritual and moral development. And after 25 years of military service, John retired from the Air Force in 1996 and began working as a human resources manager in Phoenix and at the Pinal County Human Resources Department. John and his wife Aletha raised 5 children in Phoenix and managed several home-based businesses together. That's quite a list right there. All right, so let's join together and give a warm One Church welcome to John Akram. Come on up. Come on up, sir. Make yourself comfortable. You're among friends. You've been here before, so welcome back to One Church.
Wow, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that, and it really does feel great to be back here. You know, as I sat here the last time with Khalil on this seat.
That's right.
I was amazed at the way you conduct your services and how the band can convey their faith and worship through music.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy medium to be able to, transfer, one's heart into, instruments, and then have everybody moving. I mean, it really moves you. And I commend the congregation and you as well to bringing all these people together.
Well, thank you,
one
sir.
Church.
We've got a good thing going here with all these people. You know, we're thankful for our band and this congregation. I'm proud of this congregation. They're loving, open-minded people. And as I said, you're among friends today.
I feel
we had a great conversation recently. We had about a 2-hour lunch, I think, right? They're getting ready to kick us out of there, I think. But I really enjoyed meeting you, hearing your story. You have moving things to share and things that we all need to hear. I need to hear it. I want to hear it. I want to gain wisdom and understanding, and all of us do too. So we're just going to dive right in. You ready?
Okay.
All right, so I've got some questions to ask, and I have just a few open-ended questions, and I just want John to share from the heart so we can all hear and enter into your story and the story of many people. So tell us what life was like in Pittsburgh in probably the mid to late 1950s. And then how did that change once the 1960s came around? What was life like back then?
Wow. I grew up in a family that was really family-oriented. It was kind of like, for me and my 3 brothers, it was almost like being on the Leave It to Beaver show. Anybody relate to that? My father, he was a steel worker. As he said, he worked in steel mills, over 30 years, actually about closer to 40. And my mother, she was a real stay-at-home mom. She worked hard at providing meals for us, our ironing, 4 boys. She ironed everything that we wore. She even ironed our underwear.
Oh, wow. That's a good mom right there. Wow.
And we had a very strong family bond. My grandfather was the pastor of an AME Zion church, and it was called the West End AME Zion Church. And of course, it was a relatively small church, but the whole family that was there in Pittsburgh attended this church. And not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because my grandfather was a no-nonsense preacher. I mean, he was a real, like fire and brimstone, old-time, down south preacher. And I was really kind of afraid of him. And I think most of the rest of the family were too, because he stood up in the pulpit in his black robe, and he would, march back and forth in the pulpit, shouting, stomping his feet, and just, you could see the chandeliers, just rocking back and forth, he would speak. And then I had an uncle that was the organist. He didn't have anything as elaborate as this, but he had this little Hammond B3 organ that every time he would make a point, he hit that organ. And we had aunts and uncles in the amen corner. Right. They were on that front row,
right?
There, and they would say hallelujah and amen, real loud and everything. And every time they say it, I'd jump. And it was. But afterwards, we would all, go to dinner, eat downstairs in the church. Yeah. And then on Sunday afternoons, we'd take a ride and we'd go to the airport, watch the planes take off, propeller airplanes.
Oh, wow.
And then during the week, we went to school. Now, was a Boy Scout. My younger brother was a Cub Scout. We went to camp. We went to visit museums, conservatories in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And it was a real rich environment at the time. Yeah. We had a thing on Saturday mornings where everybody all the kids in the neighborhood would leave early in the morning, and we wouldn't come back until the street lights come on. And we would go all over the neighborhoods. Pittsburgh was a very diverse area, a big city, but one type of community rolled right into another. We had, our community, the black community, then we had the Italians, we had the Germans, we had the Polish, so on and so forth. Yeah. And, everybody was a melting pot. And we would go to the different neighborhoods and we would play different games. The Italian neighborhood, they would play, we had this little ball, we'd throw it on the sidewalk, on the curb, and it would bounce off. It was their style of baseball. Yeah. And we would go, to various neighborhoods, and then when it was, time to eat, we would have, we'd hear or smell the different smells, and the kids would invite us in to eat. Wow. And we were eating in all the different neighborhoods, and the moms, they were all the same. Boy, you better eat all of that food.
Right.
And we did.
That's right.
And they would, if we didn't eat all the food, we had to pay for it. We paid, they called it the strap, and we got it.
Yeah, wow.
And we would, it was just such a rich environment. And then we all, at junior high school, the high school was predominantly black, but most of the other kids in the neighborhoods, mostly like the Italians, they went to Catholic schools. Yeah. But, after school, we all pretty much came together.
So there was a lot of diversity, but among the various neighborhoods, people seemed to get along. There's a freedom.
Absolutely.
And then the 1960s rolled around.
Wow.
And what happened? How did the neighborhood dynamic change in a way that maybe reflected the larger societal changes in the country? What happened in the 1960s?
Well, in the 50s, there wasn't very much media. There wasn't much exposure to bring in the problems that was going on in the various parts of the world or the country. Yeah. So our neighborhoods were what we saw in our eyes. That was what our world was like. And in the 60s, television started coming in. At that time, everybody had at least one TV. Yeah. And then we started seeing the various issues starting to pop up, not just in the United States, but all over the world. There were injustices that were, visibly displayed on TV with, the black community, the racial strife that was going on down south, the problems and issues and discrimination that was waged against all people of color as well as women during those early 60s. Yeah. And that whole civil rights movement, was starting to, I would say, to advance, but more, I think, appropriately, erupt. Yeah. So what was being seen, we were seeing children being killed through explosions in churches. We were seeing on TV the results of blacks being hanged, murdered, the civil rights workers. You may have heard about the Freedom Riders, where busloads of people would go from northern cities and go down south and do what you just talked about in Isaiah,
that's right.
Speaking out for injustice. They were going down south to speak out against injustice, and they, too, a lot of them lost their lives in pursuit of seeking justice. Yeah. And what was being reflected on the TVs, we saw blacks, especially, the water hoses, the dogs being sicked on them. We saw a lot of beatings and even shootings. And we were feeling the results of that because a lot of those people were our people. We had relatives in Alabama. We had cousins and aunts and uncles that were, right down there in Selma, Alabama, and in Mississippi that were, facing the discrimination and the violence that was erupting, and we basically couldn't do very much about it from a standpoint of going into help, because if you started south in your own vehicle or with someone else, then you were stopped numerous times along the way. They asked, what were you doing, where were you going, all types of questions, just like you were going to another country. And a lot of people were actually turned away and, go back home, go back to Detroit, go back to Chicago, go back to Pittsburgh. Yeah. And so we saw even the dynamics in the neighborhood starting to change. We saw where at one particular point of view was happening that people started losing their jobs because of discrimination. Case in point, my father, he came home one day with tears in his eyes, and he had lost his job. And he was crying because he said that, we asked him, why, Dad? Why'd you lose your job? Yeah. He said, well, the foreman came and told me that I had to go down to the labor gang and leave my job as a press operator because they had given it to a 21-year-old white kid that was, going to be working in a position. Yeah. And he said, to the foreman, see, what do you mean? I've got to go down to the labor gang. And of course, working in the labor gang, he was going to lose about maybe $10 an hour working as a general laborer, as opposed to, he was a skilled professional in punching the holes in the wheels that went on the railroad cars, with precision. He did that for over 30 years. Yeah. So now he's going to lose his job to a young white man. Yeah. And when he, spoke out, the foreman said, nigga, if you don't get your ass, excuse me.
No, it's, you ought to hear the way these people talk, John. I told you you're among friends, right?
Down to the labor gang, I'm going to fire you behind.
Yeah.
So he said, at that point, there's nothing else that he could do. Yeah. So he left, at the end of the day, come home, and the only thing he could do was cry because here, not only he had lost his job, but he lost his self-esteem, he had lost his motivation, just all the 30 years of hard work that he put in for U.S. Steel was gone now. And this was starting to happen, all throughout the city. All of my uncles worked in the steel mill. One by one, they started to lose their jobs. Wow. The neighborhood, one by one, we saw fathers coming home looking down, and everybody knew what had happened. They lost their jobs. The neighborhood started to, you could physically see what was happening. The kids who used to have clean clothes all the time were starting to walk around. They were wearing the same clothes every day, for a week. They were going to school with holes in their shoes. It was so bad, that at dinner times, when we used to be able to smell fried chicken or at the time pork chops frying in the pan, there was nothing coming out of the kitchens. And we saw even the ice cream man stopped coming to our neighborhood to start getting that bad because nobody had any money to buy ice cream.
Yeah.
So to even go further than that, we started to see more of the family starting to deteriorate because nobody had any money. We couldn't afford to have some of the just the bare necessities.
Yeah.
And when you don't have money, you don't have things. Families start to
That's right.
eat at each other.
Right.
And the whole neighborhood started to go down. And so we would get away from our neighborhood, or try to get away from our neighborhood and go to the old neighborhoods that we used to go play, stick ball and off the wall baseball down in the Italian neighborhoods and the various other ethnic neighborhoods. And we were starting to be called names, get out of here, nigga, go home, get out of our neighborhood. And this was, a few years ago, we were having fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were very good friends with a lot of these kids, and a lot of these kids went to, the schools with us.
Yeah.
And I remember once, a friend of mine that was, he sat beside me in mechanical drawing in high school. His name was Harry Chu, and he was a good friend of mine, and we had a good relationship. His family was Chinese, and I ate dinner at his home a lot of times. Harry told me one day, he said, "John, I can't hang out with you anymore." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, if I start hanging out with you, people might think we're friends, and the white kids, they might beat me up.
Yeah.
So we had to leave. Probably the most hurting part was when a young lady, I had a crush on this lady, a little girl by the name of Assunta Rondinelli, Italian, right? And we were, there was nothing really serious because, maybe 10th grade, once in a while we would, touch hands or something like that. But we had this kind of affinity. And she came to me one day, with tears in her eyes saying, "We can't talk anymore." I said, "What do you mean?" "My mother and father told me to stop talking to all black kids, colored kids at that time."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that was harmful, that was hurting. And, we had to go back into our neighborhoods, and we stayed in our neighborhoods. And we saw the neighborhood starting to erupt.
Yeah.
We saw the police brutality. We saw stores closing up. We saw the riots, and those riots, ended up in basically burning down not only Pittsburgh, but major cities, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles. And, so many things started to just explode. And that was a very, very tumultuous time.
It was a big change in a short amount of time. But it seems like kind of a high-pitched ring in John's mic. Can you guys hear that? I don't know. I can. Just maybe pull down the gain just a little bit and take care of that. And so you saw this eruption in the 1960s. And then there were some groups who had different ways of responding to that. Obviously, there were different types of civil rights leaders. I mean, we know the names of these giants of people who rose up as leaders. One of those groups was the Nation of Islam. And I really enjoyed hearing you talk about what happened when the Nation of Islam kind of came through in Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago, some of those cities. What was it like, in your neighborhood when, the Nation of Islam came into Pittsburgh?
Wow. Our communities were starting to look for answers. And these answers weren't coming from any of the sources that we thought would be able to help. The politicians, they couldn't help because they were part of the problems. The teachers in the schools, they couldn't help because they didn't know what the history of black people were, coming out of slavery or being in slavery. The history books taught a totally different thing in schools. So they didn't understand the strife and that continuum of strife coming from out of slavery, depression, coming into the various eras, the 50s, and then now in the 60s, the eruption. They didn't understand that, so they couldn't teach it. The preachers in the churches, they were teaching a different type of strategy, basically turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we were turning the other cheek down south, but that was getting us killed. That was getting the young young adults or young children murdered because they were turning the other cheeks.
Yeah.
So I was selling a newspaper called the Pittsburgh Courier. And the Pittsburgh Courier was and still is the nation's first and foremost black newspaper. And it was actually manufactured, not too far from where I lived in Pittsburgh. Yeah. And right in the center of that newspaper was an article called Muhammad Speaks. And here was this black man, very nice, well-dressed man with really clean cut. He had this black fez on with a gold crescent moon and these stars on it. And I just had to read it at this one time. And in reading, he was teaching that black people need to, get up off of their feet and stop basically crying and whining about what's going on and do something for yourself. Pick yourself up off your feet, do things that bring your community and your families back together. Get your pride and your dignity back together, because you can't depend on anybody else to do that for you. Mm-hmm. So as I read further, I found out that my oldest brother was attending one of the temples. And he took me to one of the meetings, and I saw this, the meeting, had this information that really touched a nerve for me. And so I started to really get interested, and I started to get involved. And then once the Honorable Elijah Muhammad came to town with his entourage, and he came with an entourage of people like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and they would have a meeting at the Syria Mosque in Pittsburgh, a venue of about 2,000 people, and it was a sight to see. All of the people, well-dressed and, really acting dignified, and the messages that these leaders had in bringing the communities together, cleaning ourselves up, making sure that we preserve our heritage and making sure that we go forward, and with our own dignity, others will realize that dignity and pride that we have in ourselves, yeah, and eventually leave us alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he basically taught me the foundations of getting into mainstream Islam, because when he passed in 1975, that legacy, stood the test of time, because we had went through so much and was able to gain even more.
So you saw people who were really struggling in life, and all of a sudden they get cleaned up and straightened out, right? And
it was really a sight to see. We saw the neighborhoods cleaned up. People started working together. People started making clothes. People started sharing, cooking, making sure that everybody had something, mm-hmm, making sure that we traded with each other, where we were spending, people would get their paychecks and they would go straight out to different sources, and they started trading within the community. It started to, the streets started to get cleaned up. The drug addicts, the thugs, and the prostitutes, stopped hanging out on the street corners. And the whole dynamic changed so much that significance of pride and dignity came back, and we were able to, go forward and withstand what was going on with us at that time.
Yeah, and then you mentioned in 1975 there was this mass conversion, led by W.D. Muhammad, if I'm correct.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad's son. Okay,
and about 1 million men, I think, are so converted at one time, essentially, and
basically.
Is that true? And then shortly after that, you transitioned into like more mainstream Islam, and Khalil shared with us a few months ago about his faith, and I wanted to give you the chance to talk about, and you started reading the Quran for the first time, is that?
Absolutely. We were being taught, we weren't being taught by the Quran during the regime of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but when his son took the leadership, he introduced the Quran to us, mm-hmm, and made sure that we studied, and in this studying, I found something that really drove some points home for me. In my travels throughout the world in the Air Force, I found that there were many different peoples, many different types of people, many different shades of people, different backgrounds, different knowledge levels. It was so diverse that it really made me feel good to be a part of this creation. And when I read in the Quran a verse that said that God had created mankind and created them in the various shades, the various tongues, and scattered them throughout the earth so that you may find each other and love each other and not to despise each other. That lit me up. That made me feel so good. I said, I like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's when it really drove the point home that we're all God's people. We're all God's children. And we all share basically the same things. As I was looking at the scriptures that you had there, and me and Brother Lamar was saying to each other, that's the same thing that we see in the Quran. And it's true that all of the scriptures basically say the same thing. All of the prophets had the same message. And that message, of love and respect and finding each other, knowing each other, and loving each other.
Yeah.
That's a universal message.
Thank you for sharing that. You went on to be a Muslim leader throughout your military career here locally in Phoenix. What does your faith mean to you now?
It means that I need to do a lot more work because there's so much that we have to do, and I don't feel like that I've done enough. The Quran tells us that we are the vicegerents or the caretakers of the world. I've got to do more work. I'm motivated by the Quran as well as all of the scriptures because it's just one continuous message down through the ages that is basically the same. Some places interpreted it a little differently. But for me, it has given me some stability to be able to face the adversities that we come up against every day and try to make a difference.
Yeah.
And my faith is the driving point for me.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being willing to share. Was this a good place to be this morning? To hear these stories? And, as you're sharing, I'm thinking, and I appreciate you said it, there is a core truth that runs through various faiths. There really is. There are people who are a part of certain factions of each faith who deny that. And they want to retreat, pull back into extremism. We see that in various faiths and do harm. But there really is a core truth. When Khalil and I talk, when he calls me up, he says, "Brother Ryan."
That's right.
And I say, "Brother Khalil, how you doing?" And so now, can you be Brother John?
Absolutely,
to me?
Brother
Okay,
Ryan.
Brother Ryan. All right. You shared some things today that are hard for some people to hear. Maybe not hear so much. But are hard for some people who grew up like I did to hear. But we're invited, I'm speaking about me and where I come from, we're invited to have understanding and wisdom and to listen in the spirit of love and unity that you share with is just all the more helpful to do that. And I look forward to lots more conversations like this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Can we thank John one more time?
Thank you.
It was great. Excellent.
Thank you.